Hello and welcome back to Watching Brief for the week of the 11th of September 2023. I didn't have to work too hard to remember that one because Monday was my birthday. I am now in my 40th year, having just had my 39th birthday of corporeal existence on Earth. And, it could be worse. Could be worse. How are things with
Well,
you, Andy?
I'm fine. I think on the bright side, you've outlived most medieval British monarchs.
Hey, that's that's not to be scoffed at. But then again, I do have a bath more than once a year, which is important.
I thought that was an urban myth, but
It probably is an urban myth, yeah, yeah. But it's nice. We like to think of royalty as being smelly little weirdos.
you ought to be writing the royal column for the Daily Mail after coming in with things like that.
Smelly little weirdos. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
Anyway,
who disappear off to California with their allegedly unsuitable wives.
well, apparently, yeah, apparently, yeah.
I know nothing about that.
No, no. No, that is very Daily Mail of you.
Yeah.
Anyway, we are here to continue with our ongoing Watching Brief, our mission to observe the news of the archaeological world and bring it to you here for topical conversation below. And we're going to start with highlighting the link of the week. We decided to include below a link to the UNICEF appeal connected to the earthquake in Morocco. It's requesting that you consider donating to our Children's Fund Award. That's UNICEF's Children's Fund Award, not ours. And it just seems as though we're getting at the moment natural disaster after natural disaster. There's been so many fires, earthquakes, flooding. It's a difficult year. Well, it's been a difficult summer, hasn't it?
These appalling stories certainly seem to have been coming thick and fast, and I should say, obviously, people will be aware as we record of the awful devastation in Libya, caused by the torrential rain and dam breaks. We haven't got a lot of detail on that yet, and which is why we're not mentioning it in detail, just in passing. I suspect we may hear more about the implications and maybe even heritage implications in due course. But we also wanted to highlight the UNESCO's response to the Moroccan earthquake last weekend. UNESCO, of course, being the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, which has heritage within its remit. And it has just issued a statement following the Friday 8th of September earthquake. The statement's dated 13th of September, updated on the 14th today. And obviously, as everybody does, it first of all sends condolences to the people of Morocco, and particularly the relatives of the missing. And it adds that Morocco can count on UNESCO's solidarity. This is in the name of Audrey Azoulay, who's the Director General of UNESCO. UNESCO and Morocco have quite a long history of cooperation, and there are a number of World Heritage sites in the country. The Medina in Marrakesh being one of them. It's been on the World Heritage List since 1985. A couple of famous mosques have also been damaged, and in other provinces, buildings have been severely damaged by cracking and other effects of the earthquake. It also cites education as being a cause for concern. It's particularly the earthquake has particularly affected isolated rural areas to the south of the capital. But UNESCO says that, and this is quite encouraging, really. We hear a lot about commentary about white saviors in this kind of situation, and UNESCO goes out of its way to express, and I'm quoting here, full confidence in Moroccan professionals to mitigate the emergency and take necessary measures. Morocco has solid expertise in heritage protection and rehabilitation, and last year it signed an agreement with UNESCO to enable African countries to benefit from its skills as well as from its education policies. UNESCO is ready to contribute depending on the needs expressed, and its Rabat office is in contact with the relevant ministries. So there you have UNESCO in a support role rather than having to take a lead. And to some extent, at least, although the situation's appalling, that is encouraging that there's a lot of capacity. They've identified a lot of capacity in country, and let's hope that they can start to mitigate things soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Before we dive into the rest of the watching brief this week, we have, as ever, some articles and some updates to highlight. The first of those being news of a third arrest in the Crooked House fire investigation. Now, people may recall a couple of episodes ago, we highlighted that there had been 2 arrests. This appears to be one on top of that. And it's the arrest of a 51-year-old is it a Buckinghamite? Someone from Buckingham, who's been.
The police say a man from Buckingham, and I think we need to keep with that phraseology.
Fair enough. Who was held on suspicion of conspiracy to commit arson at the building known as Britain's wonkiest pub. Now, you were saying with the previous 2, a man 66 and a man 33, that the arson charge was. Is it arson that's been levied with sort of reckless attention towards the safety of others in that sense. I've forgotten exactly what the wording is, but it's a charge which is a serious one in terms of endangering life and therefore presumably property as well. Do you think that's, again, it's an ongoing investigation, but do you think that that's more or less what this is going to be charged on, as opposed to, obviously, we have a heritage and architectural interest in the structure?
Okay, well, two things I should say. First of all, the latest statement from Staffordshire Police states that we can now confirm that a 51-year-old man from Buckingham has been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to commit arson with intent or being reckless as to whether life was endangered.
Yeah.
He's since been released on conditional police bail while we continue to carry out a number of lines of inquiry. Absolutely right. As I said previously when we covered the first 2 arrests, again, no charges. The 2 people arrested previously were also released on conditional bail.
Yeah.
But the charge of conspiracy with intent is at the higher end of available charges, and the fact that the police are still continuing to say that's what they're pursuing, I think, is potentially significant. Having said that, charges have to be agreed first of all within the police and also with the Crown Prosecution Service. And the Crown Prosecution Service in particular will only give the go-ahead for prosecution on particular charges if they think there's a reasonable chance of success and that there's a public interest. Right. So this isn't a done deal yet, but certainly these people are being questioned with regard to potentially some very serious charges, which on conviction would almost certainly result in prison time.
There's also an additional line here. The local authority said it had not agreed to the total destruction of the site, and it is investigating whether the demolition was unlawful. Now, what does that mean in real terms? In so much as if you're the owner of a property, local authority has said do not demolish this site, but make it safe by demolishing perhaps the upper floors, I believe is what was advised, and then the whole thing is knocked down. Is that a matter of investigating to what extent, say, communication was an issue?
No, it's actually investigating the extent of any unlawful activity, right. If any. There is a fire at your pub. I inspect it as council inspector the following day, and I say, well, actually, that gable end looks insecure, and the roof's about to collapse. You can take down the gable end and the roof, but the rest of it you don't touch. And then the same day, you send in a JCB and flatten the site. You have actually overstepped your authority, and I can investigate you on that basis.
So in that sense, shall we say, a transgression, some sort of misdemeanor has definitely occurred. It's just the extent to which that is an unlawful act.
We can't say that it's definitely occurred because there may be extenuating circumstances we're not aware of.
Right. Okay.
So, for example, an email that might have been misinterpreted or something like that.
Right. Okay.
And again, that's purely
potentially
hypothetical. I'm not saying that's what has happened, but I'm saying that's
no.
the kind of thing that might come to bear in a case like this.
Yeah, but I suppose that's what I'm trying to ascertain is what's the distance between effectively, the effect is you've done what you've been told not to do.
Yes.
And then, but what's the distance between that and being judged unlawful? And as you say, so there could be aspects of crossed wires somewhere in the middle. Is that what this sort of investigation is about, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, yes, exactly, and it has to be said that the potential charges, court action in the basis, in the case of unlawful demolition, the consequences for individuals, and unless they've, which hasn't been alleged in this case, but deliberately ignored a court order, which could be find them in contempt of court. It's much less severe than the charges of arson if they end up being brought, and even if the same people are involved, which we don't know. But the consequences on the demolition, it would be a civil case rather than a criminal case, almost certainly, and the result would almost certainly be a fine and or an instruction to rebuild.
Okay, interesting.
But that's by no means a foregone conclusion either. Having said that, the recent precedent is the two pubs that have been demolished unlawfully. In both cases that were brought to court, the developer owner was ordered to rebuild.
Yeah, brick for brick. Yeah.
And in fact, we should add that the site at Crooked House has now been cleared. A specialist company was brought in to salvage as many bricks as were possible from the wreckage, and in fact, there's some quite striking shots on the Wolverhampton Express and Star, showing the site as now clear compared to as it was just a month ago, with basically a pile of rubble and burnt timbers. The bricks themselves have been locked in sealed steel shipping containers, and await the campaigners' hope future reuse.
Yeah. There's also been an interesting story that's come out in the past couple of days, linked to the site. Or rather, I suppose it unfolded on the site. There's been a police probe as violence broke out at the Crooked House site. Now, this seems to be a matter of people have been hanging around at the site, both in terms of protest, but also just in terms of curiosity. And it appears possibly some people might have been a bit inebriated, had a little bit of a fight, and someone got, it says, hit by a car but was not seriously injured. This has led to local campaigning groups to request that people don't just go out there to down a load of cider and lark about. But it's, as I was saying to you, I mean, the reason why I'm including this link below is that it really highlights that this pub, and what would have been barely registering on anyone's radar, registers as a nationally significant report on the BBC, because this pub has become a bit of a cultural moment in that sense. So it's interesting how all eyes are on this, and I imagine, again, I'm not trying to speculate on the investigation, but I imagine there must be people doing the investigating, looking to the outcomes, looking to what happens next, will be aware that they have a lot of eyes on them, I imagine.
I think so. I mean, I suspect that whoever did what they did to the Crooked House wasn't expecting it to become as you say, a national cultural moment.
No,
they badly miscalculated, and we are now seeing that play out in real time. It may even result in a tightening up of legislation regarding permitted developments and demolition and the protection of unlisted buildings.
Yeah, and that curious moment between announcing someone's interest in listing a site and it being listed, that moment of vulnerability. Yeah.
Yes, and we touched on it last time, I think, but it's certainly been mentioned in the past. The buildings that mysteriously, as they say in Glasgow, go afire, or there was a case in Bristol where I think it was a 17th century plaster interior was ripped out by a developer just days before it was supposed to be listed. And there was no comeback because the listing is only effective from the day it's granted, not from the day it's requested.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's again, stuff to keep an eye on, and we will. Next, we have a development. I'm not really sure how to word this with regards to the old Oswestry Hillfort and the decision to go ahead with developing 83 dwellings very close to a Hillfort in the Welsh-English borders. We covered this on Watching Brief in terms of the decision of the council, how that was made, how arguably one would imagine there was room for pushback on this, possibly in the form of a judicial review, but we're yet to see confirmation of that happening or being in the works. What has happened, and where do we see this possibly going? What sort of time frame are we looking at?
Right. Well, I hope that possibly next time, if not relatively soon, we might have some more detailed information on the on the outcome from Old Oswestry. New viewer start here. The issue with Old Oswestry was that you have a nationally important site where the local authority was alleged by archaeological experts, including the Prehistoric Society and the CBA, to have misinterpreted the National Planning Policy Framework and particularly the requirements to protect the setting of scheduled ancient monuments, and particularly the most significant scheduled ancient monuments. The argument is that the development of these 83 houses, plus a viewing platform and ancillary structures, roads and so on, is too close to the Hillfort and damages the rural setting. Archaeological groups were pretty much unanimous in this. Historic England gave a very strong steer that the council should protect the setting, but in fact the council didn't just fail to protect the setting by granting planning consent. They did so having reneged on an agreement with Historic England called the Statement of Common Ground, which put literally a red line on the map beyond which the development wasn't supposed to go. They unilaterally chose to ignore that.
Well, and also it should be said that was an attempt to give ground. It was an attempt to find a compromise, wasn't it? And it's been one can say it's been trampled on. I'm trying not to use like fully judgmental language, but it's been ignored, shall we say?
It certainly appears to have done, and the council gave very little reasoning behind that. And in fact, if you read the minutes, of the planning meeting at the end of July, which had been published on the Shropshire Council website, it's a very thin description of what was actually discussed. We'll link again to the article in the pipeline, which gives a more full account of how the meeting progressed and what was discussed, and particularly how the archaeological points of view were put, because you see very little of that in the council's official minutes. As things stand at the moment, under English law, under English planning law, if you were going to bring a judicial review into a planning decision, you have 6 weeks. Now, when that time starts, it is possibly under question. But at the moment, there's no sign of a judicial review having been sought. What has happened, and this is the new development since the planning consent was granted in July, in August, there was a request sent into the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, Michael Gove's department, to what's called call in the decision. If there is a contentious planning decision, the Secretary of State, Michael Gove, has the right to call it in for judgment centrally in Whitehall rather than by the local planning committee. This request was made by a third party. I understand it to have been at least some of the organisations that were involved in the campaign, the Hands Off Old Oswestry Hillfort campaign.
Okay.
which included the Campaign for Rural England, Campaign to Protect Rural England, and others, including archaeological bodies. That resulted in the middle of August with what was called a stop notice, which forbade the council granting planning permission until the Secretary of State had adjudicated. About 10 days later, towards the end of August, the word came back from Whitehall that Michael Gove was not going to call in the planning application, and therefore the stop notice was rescinded, which means the council can now grant planning permission. It may be that, however, that gives some extra time in terms of whether or not opponents might seek a judicial review. But I'm hoping to get more clarity on that before we talk again.
Okay. Just briefly then. Given that previously one might have begun that countdown from the moment of the initial decision, and we are, I think, just beyond 6 weeks from then.
Yes.
Are you hoping to see some urgency in response to your queries, shall we say?
I'm hoping to see a response to the questions we're asking, because it's potentially very significant to the security, particularly the settings of scheduled ancient monuments and listed buildings, which also have issues of setting. As things stand at the moment, the reason why Old Oswestry is so contentious and potentially so the consequences are potentially so far-reaching is that it does appear to lower the bar for what's allowed within the setting, the immediate setting of really important sites. So the idea that might go forward without it being tested in courts, without testing whether Shropshire applied the National Planning Policy Framework, particularly the ideas around setting, correctly, I think is potentially quite serious.
Yeah. See previous episodes for just how serious that could be. Next we have, and again, an awful lot of this seems to be floating in and around Westminster. It's so interesting how at the moment archaeology and environment and planning policy and lawmakers are in the thick of it and in the mix. The extent to which archaeological bodies are doing likewise is, as we've just discussed, a little bit variable. But next we have a story from the House of Lords. They have blocked, that's the upper house in the British parliamentary system, they have blocked government plans, that's the lower house's plans, and what's the point, the government in charge, plans to scrap the so-called nutrient neutrality rules. These are rules that we inherited from our time in the European Union and that dictate the relationship between well, is this attached to polluter pays? Is it about taking responsibility for land use? Is just in the context of building, or is it land use more broadly in terms of, for example, farming and say, I don't know, managing forests and wetlands and this kind of thing?
Right. The reason this was important is because although this is specifically about building development in sensitive areas around rivers, the issue at stake was the whole underpinning of environmental regulations, which are basically identified by two phrases. One is the polluter pays, and the second is the precautionary principle.
Yes.
Excuse me. Both those come from EU practice and have been absorbed into UK law, even though we've left the EU, because there was basically a cut and paste of EU regulations into British law, England, Scotland, Wales, and the north of Ireland. When
EU, we exited, sorry, I should also say EU regulations, which we had a hand in writing. It's worth saying.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Yes, and MEPs, members of the European Parliament from the British Isles, voted to pass. The idea that these were foreign diktats with no democratic accountability is nonsense.
Yes.
Anyway, cut to the chase. A few weeks ago, Michael Gove again made an announcement that the government was going to seek an amendment to the so-called Levelling Up Bill, which was in Parliament yesterday. And the idea behind that was that developers who have up until now been ordered to pay for the remediation of any increase in nutrient pollution in watercourses would no longer be forced to do that.
No.
The mitigation will be taken on by the taxpayer, and local authorities would be instructed under the law, had it gone through, will be instructed not to take into consideration potential pollution from housing developments in particular. And that any evidence to the contrary that was presented to them, they could ignore. In fact, not just could ignore, should ignore.
It's a bizarre. I mean, thankfully, the House of Lords got in the way of it. But it's a bizarre notion. Ignore the evidence of your eyes. Yeah.
Well, look, let me just read. This is an intervention in the debate, and as I say, the debate was yesterday, Wednesday, as we're recording. From Lord Deben. Now, Lord Deben is a senior Conservative. He is better known as John Gummer, who was a Conservative minister under John Major. He might actually be most famous as the person who, at the height of the BSE crisis in the early 1990s, did a photo opportunity feeding his daughter.
It's him, right?
His daughter a beef burger, yeah. But on this occasion, it's not a photo op. He's on the side of the angels. He says, "I rather object to the fact that the newspapers say I'm a Conservative rebel, because he's a Conservative." He's a Conservative peer, former senior member of the party, former Prime Minister, who was actually voting against Gove's proposed amendment. He said, "It is the government who is the rebel here because they are not being conservative over this. First, they are asking local authorities, I can hardly believe it, to disregard the facts. This is the kind of attitude we see in the Republican Party in the United States, the people who do not believe in climate change, the anti-vaxxers who say, quote, don't look at the facts. The second thing that local authorities are being asked to do is to encourage ignorance. Not only don't look at the facts, but also don't look at any evidence or find any evidence. Just do what the government says should be done." And that was at the core of it. It was seen as really bad law, setting a really bad precedent. Now, why Gove did this is the conspiracy theory is that it was a sop to developers who had traditionally made large donations to fund the Conservative Party. Those donations had allegedly started drying up at the beginning of this year because it looks as though the Conservative Party is in deep political trouble, and there's a general election coming up within the next year. So the idea was that it was trying to get the property developers back on side by making it cheaper for them to build. There's there's an even deeper conspiracy theory is that Gove never intended it to go through because he knew it would be greeted like that. But what it's done, it's made it look as though they're trying to help the property developers, and so please give us those 7-figure donations. But also it's created a wedge issue with the Labour Party because after some havering, Labour peers joined other peers, including some Conservatives, but also Liberal Democrats, crossbenchers, as they call people who had no party affiliation, and the Greens, in particular, Baroness Jenny Jones, who in fact is a trained archaeologist. She's a paleobotanist trained at UCL. They together that there were enough to vote down the amendment. Now, the amendment cannot now be brought back because of the way it was brought in by the government as a government amendment. It can't be reintroduced to the bill, so they would have to introduce new legislation to try and pass this, and there probably isn't time to do that because it would have to go out to consultation and all sorts of other things.
I suppose my question is, why do we presume that developers want to cause harm to the environment? And now that's not to say why do we presume that we need the legislation, but rather why does someone who wants to get on the good side of development think that, oh yeah, we'll make it easy for you to trash the rivers by your building sites? I think part of me thinks it might be an element of projection. It might also actually be an element of responding to private conversations where people are literally saying, come on, old boy, can't we just, dump stuff in the rivers? Who knows, I guess. But it's a curious one. But as you say, it may be entirely performative. But even that's not fun. I don't particularly enjoy having to examine and take seriously the whims of a government that may well feel as though it's dying on its legs. I mean, it's a difficult time. It's a difficult time.
Look, I think it's worth looking at this in a wider context. One is the context of a government that is saddled with Brexit and is trying to identify Brexit benefits, and freedom from EU regulation was seen as one of their quotes Brexit benefits. Now, obviously, people in the environmental world, and that includes not just the natural environment NGOs like the RSPB and the Countryside Alliance and so on, and CPRE and so on, but historic environment groups like the Heritage Alliance, which includes the Council for British Archaeology, they were also against these moves because of the danger to the polluter pays principle, which as I said earlier, underpins pretty much everything that happens in developer-funded environmental mitigation. The current government does appear to be, and people argue this is partly to do with Rishi Sunak's own background and interests, in not wanting to pile costs onto developers, entrepreneurs. The idea being the idea of this was being to save basically property developers some money. And it was seen as a quick fix. The government's been going around saying, this move's going to cost 100,000 houses, which people could be living in a few years' time. Most independent observers think that's the output of the back end of a cow, because it's a figure it's a scaremongering figure that's been created to create a wedge issue with the Labour Party, who, as I say, ended up supporting the amendment, voting down the amendment.
Yeah, but also hitherto, it's not like buildings haven't been built and sold with all of the costs associated with it factored into the cost of doing business. So really what this is an attempt to provide more profit as opposed to make more houses built or get more houses built. As you say, you could probably argue it in lots of different ways, but I still think that a responsible developer, especially ones who have franchises, people who actually who develop in various, not an individual but rather a development business, they often have statements about their green intentions and their green credentials and what they do in terms of energy efficiency buildings and so on and so forth. I just think it's quite cynical to presume that's what's going to get you money is to let them. To take away, the burden of being environmentally responsible. I mean, again, this is just a personal perspective I'm putting out there. It's not, it's just a curious thing as far as I can see.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment, the interesting thing about this, as I say, the amendment was voted down. The government can't bring it back at the moment. There's a row going on today about the effect it may or may not have on house building, but. The government is running out of time, parliamentary time, to make major changes to environmental law. And I think one of the interesting things about this, the fact that there was an alliance across the House of Lords to use the parliamentary process to not just hold this up, but to actually kill it, suggests that if the government tried to do something even more radical, and we saw the so-called attack on nature hashtag that Liz Truss's government tried to introduce, God, it seems like a century ago. It was actually only just under a year ago.
I know.
But it shows, and this is against the background of almost every day there's a story about basically rivers of poo. The fact that going for a wild swim is now the equivalent of playing Russian roulette with your health in lots of rivers and waterways in the country. The government is running out of time to make these radical changes that they've been promising for, well, successive administrations have been promising, to be frank. And so we'll see. Nobody is relaxing for a moment, but it does show, I think, the kind of struggle they'd have on their hands if they tried to bring something in even more far-reaching. And certainly for archaeologists, the good news at the moment is that in Parliament, at least, the polluter pays principle and the precautionary principle have both been upheld.
Yeah. Okay. I suppose just finally, in terms of our sector interests, any direct comment on this from the usual suspects?
What do you think?
No. Okay. With that attempt to avoid outright cynicism in mind, I'm going to take a little break now. Here's a message from us as to why you should consider supporting Watching Brief on Patreon. We'll see you in a second. A watching brief is a formal programme of observation and investigation to record and report on notable discoveries on an archaeological site. As part of our ongoing watching brief, Andy and I work hard to bring you the best, the worst, and sometimes the more quirky happenings from the world of archaeology. We aim to provide a space where voices can be heard, opinions shared, and sometimes truth spoken to power. If you believe in the work we do, please consider supporting us on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Thank you. Welcome back, and welcome to developments at the former RAF base, Scampton. Now, this is a story that we've been coming back to because developments have been trickling out of this site in terms of the relationship between the Home Office, the local council, and a historic RAF base, and its historic and architectural and community value. It all starts, this particular development starts with 5 days ago, the announcement that at RAF Scampton, the Home Office had been ordered to stop its work on an asylum camp over a planning breach. Now, the plan had been announced by the Home Office a while ago now, that they wanted to house people who are seeking asylum in this country at RAF Scampton for processing. And it seems that they might have breached planning in proceeding. Now, what did they do, I guess, is the question, and then we'll come on to how long that lasted.
Okay. Again, now, it is arguable that what we are seeing in the UK at the moment is, to a large degree, government by performance art over certain issues. The chief exponent of this is Suella Braverman, the current Home Secretary, who is overseeing...
Sorry, I was being a tree. Performance art, so go on.
Right, okay, yes, I'm a little teapot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You see, people should support us on Patreon for our performance art. Never mind our witty repertoire.
Okay.
Go on.
I actually, I think most people would rather see Suella Braverman pretending to be a tree or a teapot than as Home Secretary. But anyway, that's another story. No, Suella Braverman, Home Secretary, has been fronting up Rishi Sunak's "Stop the Boats" campaign. which is one of his 5 pledges, again, which is to try and ingratiate himself with the British public and win the next general election. It's to do with stopping people who the government insists on calling illegal migrants, who in fact the law says are asylum seekers until they're proven otherwise under UK and international law. From crossing the English Channel in dinghies and from the coast of France, and having to be rescued very often by the Coast Guard and lifeboats and brought to the UK. The government says it's been spending too much money on hotels and accommodation for these people, and it wants to find a cheaper solution. One of the cheaper solutions that it's found, apart from a plague barge called the Bibi Stockholm, where people were on for barely 3 days before they were taken off because a rather nasty variant of Legionella disease was found in the water system, is the use of former military camps to house, in the case of Scampton, around about 2,000 people. Young men, as they're described in the Home Office documents. A number of other sites have been identified, and indeed works have been continuing at those sites, though none of them have actually had any occupants yet, including Scampton. Scampton is the historic base of the Dambusters 617 Squadron. It was handed back to by the RAF last year, earlier this year. So it's no longer a military base, but the government still effectively has control of it. Work began to convert the site into a camp for asylum seekers a couple of months ago. People might remember, we talked about the application which was thrown out to move the supposed grave of Wing Commander Guy Gibson's dog from outside one of the listed buildings at RAF Scampton. So this is a row that's been ongoing, and the reason it's been ongoing is partly because the whole issue of asylum seekers is extremely contentious in the UK at the moment. The other one is that the local authority was furious because the Home Office imposed this plan on them when they thought they had hundreds of millions of pounds worth of investment ready to go to turn it into a tech hub and employment centre, which is now on hold and may have been lost completely. So the local people are absolutely furious, and the local council are absolutely furious, including the local Conservative MP. Work began at the site, including groundworks. Now that's important because that means trenching. And when this was spotted, the local authority, which is East Lindsey Council, imposed what's called a temporary stop notice under Section 171E of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990. That basically it involves planning control, and in particular whether proper assessment and mitigation has taken place regarding listed buildings and potential archaeology. Normally, if you go through planning, you have to submit, as per our previous discussion, in fact, under the precautionary principle and the polluter pays principle, archaeological and environmental impact assessments before you're allowed to start work. It appears none of this has been done. Now, for whatever reason, the Home Office appears to have commissioned the work without any of these assessments in place. The council has said, basically, this is our planning responsibility. You haven't followed the rules. You are now instructed to stop until we can assess the situation properly as per the planning system. Now that stop notice was issued last Friday, and it was effective from 7 a.m. on the morning of the 8th of September for 28 days. And it's an offence to contravene such a stop notice. Guess what happened?
Well, I know what happened. The Lincolnite has a headline that says that the council were denied entry to the RAF Scampton site as the Home Office accelerated its asylum centre work on site. So is that allowed? Given that you just said it was an offence, is that permissible? Given that this is also the Home Office, I mean, what? Yeah, this is a weird one.
Well, don't forget, government ministers can act unlawfully
Yeah.
and do act unlawfully and are found to act unlawfully quite regularly by the courts. That's what, the most famous case recently in terms of archaeology was Grant Shapps, when he was in his previous but one or whatever it was job as Transport Secretary, when he gave the green light to the A303 across the Stonehenge and Avebury World Heritage Site, and was taken to a judicial review and found to have acted unlawfully, and that permission had to be rescinded too. So this is not an unusual thing to happen. Government ministers do play fast and loose with the law, and sometimes they hope they'll get away with it. Sometimes they know they won't get away with it, but there are other reasons, and that's what the suspicion is here. The suspicion is that the Home Office is facing a judicial review of the original decision to build an asylum reception centre at Scampton, which is scheduled to be heard on the 31st of October, 1st of November. And the conspiracy theory is that in spite of the stop notice, they would rather be taken to court and be told to stop by a judge and possibly face a fine than wait for the judicial review, either comply with the planning process or wait for the judicial review. What they want to do is create a fait accompli, so that when the judicial review happens, so much work has been done that the judge says, yeah, naughty, should have been done differently, but it's not in the public interest. Too much money's been spent. Carry on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But surely such a cynical approach to that process, if that is in fact what's happening, should be considered by someone who may have to cast judgment on the situation. It's a little bit like, you hear that in some parts of the world, if someone has an accident with their car and accidentally strikes someone, it's better, they consider it to be better for themselves to reverse gear and ensure that the person that they hit is no longer alive than it is to leave them possibly alive and be responsible for their ongoing healthcare and medical needs. That surely to goodness has to be taken into account, kind of thing. Like if the government's like, well, we're just going to plow ahead and just keep on doing things, and what's the old phrase? Better to ask forgiveness than permission. Surely to goodness, the Home Office that shouldn't apply to government departments, or am I just being naive? And it does in fact apply to government departments.
Put it this way, the Home Office is very often taken to court and very often loses.
Okay. Yeah.
It's working on from that, and again, the current government has a particular angle on all this stuff, whereby if for the sake of argument, it's taken to court and loses an issue around the treatment of asylum seekers, it then goes to its client journalists at the Mail and the Telegraph and the Express and starts talking about lefty lawyers and the woke judges and the woke blob blocking the will of the people. So it's all part of the political game. That's why I said at the beginning of this, performance art. Because I'm pretty sure that Suella Braverman and her advisors will have strategized this. It may even be that they deliberately chose Scampton over other sites because it will be high profile.
And people like you and I will be talking about it. Yeah. As of 5 hours ago, the BBC has reported that RAF Scampton has now opened its doors once again. The council have been given access to inspect asylum centre work. West Lindsey District Council served a temporary stop notice, TSN, on the Home Office over concerns that heritage assets at RAF Scampton were not being protected. However, its officers and officials were given access to the site. Were expected to be given access to the site today. Government had previously said it was confident it had complied with planning rules. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also worth quoting the leader of West Lindsey District Council, who is Councillor Trevor Young, who's a Liberal Democrat. He commented in the My Local website for Lincolnshire. Some quite interesting subtext here. He said, the community continues to support us, that's the council, through the provision of information and intelligence, which is incredibly valuable. Now, that line in itself is interesting because that suggests that they're getting information which from private individuals in the local area that they're not getting from the Home Office.
Yeah.
And he continued, quote, we believe the groundworks have been completed since the stop notice was issued, and the council is incredibly concerned about the irreversible impact of this. We had informed the Home Office on Friday that we would visit the site for an inspection at 1 a.m. It must be 1 p.m. I'm sure that means
1 a.m.
On Monday. They refused us access when we arrived. We will visit the site every day to take a record and have agreed they will meet an officer on site later in the week. And as you say, there is supposed to be a meeting happening, access to the site today. But again, if he's right, if Councillor Young is right, then the work's already been done, and that was probably the intention of the Home Office. It's a cross-party issue as well. As I said, the local Conservative MP is against, as is the Labour candidate for Lincoln, Hamish Faulkner. He said the Conservatives need to stick to the law. There's a legally binding stop notice for the local council, and we expect them to follow it. I'm talking every day to people who want to see Scampton turned into the centre for jobs and industry it could be. To get there, we need the Conservatives to move the diggers off the Red Arrow's apron and start abiding by the law, and to turn up for their day in court in October.
The will of the people. Yeah.
No. I should add actually that the Home Office has been trotting out the same line ever since I've been asking them about this, which is months now, and they say, quote, delivering accommodation on surplus military sites provides a cheaper and more orderly, suitable accommodation for those arriving in small boats, while helping to reduce the use of hotels. We're confident our project, which will house asylum seekers in basic, safe and secure accommodation, meets the planning requirements. That's what the Home Office says. They may have to try and justify that in court.
Yeah. I guess we'll keep an eye on that one as well. Now, I suppose as we bring this watching brief to a close, it's worthwhile just saying that all of these things we've been talking about today, and actually an awful lot of what we've been talking about, I think, really for the past couple of years, really, has been about, I suppose, frontline, coalface case studies that ultimately describe or explain or maybe even potentially flag up potential problems with the current state of planning policy, political will, and also as well the relationship the working archaeologists, museum workers, heritage professionals, and the bodies who represent those people have with these processes. So, for example, with the old Oswestry case, we saw before the council met and made their decision a full-throated statement from the Council for British Archaeology of support for Rachel Pope's efforts on the council in the council meeting to defend the integrity of the Hillfort site. But since then, pretty much nothing on that issue. And I think not too long ago in a watching brief, I asked you about supporting winning causes and whether or not people have the stamina really to stick with causes that on the face of it seems that they're going to go over some rocky road before we might get to a place of having some sort of victory. And victory could here mean compromise, but a fuller compromise as opposed to one where a red line is drawn and then the council completely ignores it. But it seems as though that silence fills that space, and people, either friends and colleagues, aren't aware of some of these issues when I bring them up with them, or they kind of shrug and just say, well, that's just what we do, isn't it? That's just what these different groups and institutions and bodies do. They don't really do much. So I suppose by talking about all these issues, we've on the thumbnail we've got a little witty thing about planning to failing to plan. I guess what we're hoping for is that plans come together. I think I was I think I was saying to you, Andy, wasn't I, in between recordings, and you seem to agree that I touched on something that I really want to be able to say to you guys in this watching brief episodes. This is what we are doing. This is what archaeologists are doing about these issues. This is how on the ball they are with regards to planning policy and the risks, for example, of losing whole remits for the basis of commercial archaeology in this country. Don't worry, they're on it and they're doing something about it, and hopefully, we're not going to go down without some sort of a decent legal fight, essentially, a defence. But I can't. I can't report on that because, indeed, we can't report on that because it's not happening. We're not even getting, as far as I can tell, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, the old staple of, don't worry, we're having conversations behind the scenes, We're not even getting that anymore. It's just fingers in ears and squeaky lips time, isn't it?
I think it's too early to say there won't be any comment from representative bodies who, I have approached and continue to approach, particularly on the old Oswestry story.
But have you considering you've continued to approach? Have you had any response?
It wouldn't be fair for me to comment at the moment because we're still within deadline. So,
okay.
But put it this way: historically, representative bodies have been less candid than maybe they could be when we've asked them to comment on policy issues that are current, and in some cases even might be argued to be a clear and present danger to the way archaeology is conducted at the moment.
And also, to be clear, they don't have to talk to us. They could just put something else on social media. Just talk to everyone, talk to anyone.
That's absolutely right. And I think also it is fair to contextualize this in that, particularly when it comes to planning law, the playing field is tilted in favour of developers and planning authorities. The very fact that one person, Rachel Pope, was put in the position of representing the entire world of expert British archaeology at a planning meeting, for 3 minutes, I think she was allowed, and against which it's not just the developer who got an equivalent amount of time, but the council's planning officers who had pre-decided the application and were, and again, this isn't just picking on Shropshire's planners. This happens across the country because it's the way the systems have been allowed to develop. But planning officers are allowed to recommend a decision, and they wanted that decision to go through. And if you read the piece that I wrote about that planning meeting, I watched that planning meeting, recording that planning meeting, I watched it live and then watched the recording several times while I was writing the article. It was absolutely clear they wanted no other decision and no debate around anything other than passing that planning application against the expertise of basically British archaeology. It's a really important test case, and we'll see where it goes next. As I say, hopefully we'll have a steer on that fairly soon. But even if there is still time for a judicial review, we're rapidly running out of road, and somebody would have to bring it.
Bring it, yes. Thank you guys for watching. Please do comment below to expand on this conversation. If there's a news story that you wanted to take a look at, please do get in touch. There's an email on the screen. Andy is available via various DMs and both secret encoded messages and things like that you can find ways of getting to encryption. That's the word on his website. There's a tippable button there. Also, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Do take a look at the Watching Brief badge set on Etsy. Link below in the video description. But until next time. Oh, as yeah, Andy's modelling. I'm modelling a badge right now. Oh no, don't do 2. Oh no. I didn't need to see that. No, okay. Until next time, guys. Do take care. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.